Okay, moving forward with level one in Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning, I want to look now at stage two within level one. This is sometimes referred to as the individualism and exchange stage. And the individualism and exchange stage of pre-conventional morality is a stage where, as opposed to this kind of objective understanding of morality, what is right and wrong, um, you have actually a more relative understanding of morality, but this relativity is not necessarily linked to wider society or social norms. It's, in fact, a kind of more individualistic form of relativity, meaning that each individual might have different understandings of morality, and that each individual should be free to pursue their own individual interests, whatever maximizes their kind of pleasure, to use a rational choice or exchange theory kind of vocabulary or analysis, that each individual is free to pursue their individual interests in order to maximize their pleasure and minimize pain, and that each individual's understanding of what it takes to do that might be distinct, might be different. So, just kind of extending that idea within stage two. What is morally right consists of what instrumentally satisfies one's needs. So in this case, the term instrumentally means, what kind of actually leads to the satisfaction of one's needs. So, for example, within this stage of moral reasoning, an individual might, say, be waiting in line to get lunch, but decide that, the line is too long, and that they're too hungry, so they just push everyone else out of the way, cut to the front of the line, and begin to place their order. Now, in this case, if someone had this stage of or was occupying this stage of moral reasoning, that would be considered morally right because they're, kind of getting their lunch quicker, satiating their hunger a little bit quicker, and so this would be a kind of moral act. Now, of course, most people in society would agree that that is highly immoral. I know that that I wouldn't be too happy if someone pushed me out of the way to order in front of me. But this is, of course, a stage of moral reasoning that Kohlberg argues is present in at least some segment of the population. We still have this kind of risk aversion to punishment within this stage of moral reasoning. It's still located within the pre-conventional level, so it's still this kind of avoiding punishment as a motivator for morality characterization going on. So here's an example. Using the theft example that we used in our previous slides, in this stage of moral reasoning, someone may steal to feed themselves, but that depends on the severity of the punishment. So if the punishment were not too severe, if you stole to feed yourself, and the punishment was just a kind of stern reprimand or maybe a really small fine, then stealing would be essentially worth the risk, and the punishment would be worth the reward. So in this case, stealing would be considered morally right. If someone stole something to feed themselves and the punishment were an amputation of their hand, which is unfortunately a legal norm in some societies today in the world, then of course, stealing would not be worth the risk. Death or amputation or imprisonment, these things might not be worth, stealing. So the decision is made in a kind of highly rational way, based on instrumental exchange. So the individual within this stage of moral reasoning decides what to do in order to maximize their pleasure in the context of the punishment. So thinking here actually about retribution, which is a big theme in Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning. Within this stage, revenge is considered a way to administer justice. So this is a kind of tit for tat. You might, see the cliche "an eye for an eye" employed here. If someone, commits a kind of, some does something that's considered immoral against someone else, then of course an immoral act would be justifiable against the perpetrator. So, in this case, aggression is met with aggression. This can be, applied at the individual level, or this can also be applied at the societal level. So, for instance, earlier in 2020, there had been some escalation of tension between the United States and Iran. So Iran had, been kind of provocative in attacking and threatening oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, and had been, kind of supporting some attacks against U.S. proxy forces in the Middle East. This, was happening kind of through proxy forces in Yemen and in Iraq and other places. And then, of course, the United States responded by assassinating the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the Quds Force, General Qasem Soleimani. Now, in this case, if you look at those kind of actions, the tit for tat, the kind of exchange of attacks that was occurring there, we might come to the conclusion that both states were acting within this kind of stage of moral reasoning. Now, I think it's much more complex than that, and there are many other arguments to be made, but we could overlay this analysis onto that kind of interstate dynamic that was occurring in kind of early and mid 2020. Okay, so moving forward now, we are in level 2, which is referred to as conventional morality. So as I mentioned previously, there are 3 levels of moral reasoning or development according to Kohlberg. The first is pre-conventional, the second is conventional, and the third level that we'll discuss later in the lecture is called post-conventional. So conventional morality is the kind of normal morality, conventional being a synonym for normal. This is what we see most often in society. This is, in fact, the level of moral reasoning that most people occupy for the duration of their life course, according to Kohlberg. So this is quite a common form of moral reasoning. So we're looking here now at stage 3, which is sometimes referred to as good interpersonal relationships, or just the interpersonal stage. I've also heard it referred to as, just as a side note, these stage names are subjective. There are plenty of different there's a diversity of names that are used to describe these stages depending on the research and the researcher. So we're just using, some of these stage names that have been developed by other researchers. And in stage 3, the focus then moves outside of the self. It moves outside of just the individual, and the focus begins to be applied to those around us, and most specifically, significant others. I mentioned earlier that Mead defines the significant other as those who we spend the most time with and have the most extensive contact with early on in life. These could be parents, siblings, grandparents, other members of our family, those who we grow up with in a foster home or in a group home, really anyone who an individual spends a significant amount of time with early on in life. And so in this stage of moral reasoning, morality is defined by having good motives, and by doing things out of kind of interpersonal motivations. So, someone who is morally justified in this stage of moral reasoning is going to do things that help their significant others, or that are meant to protect their significant others. So, this is a kind of relative understanding of moral reasoning, but that relativity occurs within a kind of small social context, which is the family, the immediate family, or close friendship networks, and really kind of intimate social networks. So an example here, to use the stealing example once again, would be that stealing is justifiable if the intention is to help or save another, and particularly if it's a significant other. So if a parent steals to feed their children, to save their children from getting sick, or from potentially perishing, or something like that, from a horrible outcome, then this would be totally justifiable, right? The stealing is not done to satisfy one's own instrumental kind of selfish needs. It's done to help or save other people. Within this stage of moral reasoning, there is this expectation that others also share those assumptions of morality. So this is a stage of moral reasoning where definitions of morality are shared by members of the immediate community, definitely members of the immediate social kind of context or social network, so the family and friends and things like this, but also probably shared by members of the kind of community within which one exists. This doesn't mean that the entire nation or the entire state or even the entire city within which one resides is going to share the same ideas around morality, but at least within that immediate social context, there are shared assumptions of morality that exist.